So about a total of a year and 2 months in the hospital. Then I got transferred to a rehab center similar to McGee, called Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center, which is in Fishersville, Virginia, which is between Charlottesville and Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I got visited by my insurance company. I was on long-term disability, and they want to get you off disability. Well, we set up a meeting for the insurance company to come in. And a lady came in, and I was waiting for her in the room. And I could tell by her eyes and body language that, oh Lord, this guy's never going to be employable. So we had a good talk, but sure enough, when the report came back, it was worded such that with the state of technology as it is, he might be employable sometime down the road, but at this time he is not employable. So they were willing basically just to pay my benefits. But my goal was, when I spent all that time in the hospital, I decided, well, what do I want to do? I could lay back and die like a lot of people do, but I wanted to work again. And I had a lot of naysayers. Doctor telling, well, you'll need 24-hour care, and your bowel and bladder will never be the same, and you may be in bed a lot, and blah, blah, blah. And I decided to not dwell on what I couldn't do, but try to find things I could do. And this is where the adaptive technology comes in. When the insurance company rejected me, the Department of Rehabilitation Services said they would take me up as long as eventually they find for me an independent way to access a computer. So the rehab center, I ended up staying there 2 years, had a short program in COBOL, a language of COBOL, and DOS, and BASIC, but it was all mainframe computer. And I did well at that, but I didn't have any way to input into a computer. They had somebody type for me, and you could imagine having to sit next to somebody that's telling you, move up 3, move left 2, hit the F12 key, and all kinds of things. It was frustrating. It wasn't independent. It wasn't all that functional. Although I did pass the program. About the same time, we're talking about 1988. The state of Virginia had a special program where they were linking with private businesses to come up with new technologies. And one of them was a company called LC Technologies in Fairfax, Virginia, who developed eye gaze technology. And what this was, they came out with a computer and they brought it down to the rehab center, where there's a keyboard on the screen, and you look there's a camera below the screen, and you look with your eyes at the keyboard, and it's calibrated so that it looks to see where your pupil's looking at. And you'd leave it at a certain pre-calibrated time on a letter, and it would type the letter. And the idea was to use that with what they call word technology, which you can think of as Microsoft Word. When you type in a letter, a menu would come up, and it would try to guess what word you were trying to type. And as you typed further, the menu would change to different words that it was trying to. But the word predict technology wasn't very good back then. So you're basically typing letters. And although the eye gaze was good, and it could have been a possibility for me, because functionally I could only move my lips and eyes, so I couldn't use a mouse stick. There was some sip and puff technology I tried where you sip and it scans to a letter in the alphabet, and you sip again and it stops on that letter and types it. But again, it wasn't too functional, it was very slow. And I could probably use it for my personal stuff, but not in an employment situation. So at the same time, drag and dictate, the original voice input had just come out. But back then, computers were slower, there was no memory. and it was very, very crude, made a lot of mistakes. So that wasn't too functional either. Right around that time, we thought, well, maybe the IGAs would work for me if we got better word printed programs. By then, the rehab center said, you gotta leave. So, this is not a place to live. So my options were, I was still having some medical problems. So living in the community at the time was not really an option. So I applied to a whole bunch of different nursing facilities. Some were geriatric. I was on a waiting list for a place called the Virginia Home, which is a home for physically disabled. There's another one here in Philadelphia called Inglis House. And I ended up there. And when I came here, I expressed my desire to go back to work, but the issue of assistive technology came up. I applied through OBR in 1990, and it took a few years, but they finally accepted me. I had to prove myself, though. There was a school called the DMD.Eliot in Philadelphia, which was sort of like the Computer Learning Center. I don't know if they're still around, I don't think so. But basically, it's like a year or two course and you learn computers. So I wanted to learn personal computers. I knew a little bit about mainframes. So OBR took me on, but I had to first prove that I had the aptitude to do computer programming. Once I did that, we had to find a way for me to functionally input into a computer. By then computers had come up to what they called 286 machines, which still didn't have a lot of speed memory compared to nowadays. And we were on Windows 3.1 had recently come out. And OBR hired Janet and Michael Fiore, a small consulting group at the time, to evaluate me to see what would work best for inputting into a computer. So we had the IGAs people come up from Virginia, and we tested it out at DMD.Eliot. And there were a few problems. One was, this is at the time, it's a lot better now, it's still around, was it was at its very beginning, the cost was really prohibitive. Secondly, it was kind of bulky, so it wasn't really very mobile. And third, at the time, because of lighting in classrooms, that created a problem. So my part of the classroom would have to be dark. But not so much now, from what I've read about it. But so Janet and Michael started me on what was the original Dragon dictate. And Janet basically taught me over, I don't know, what, about a year it took. And to put some timeline on this, I remember talking to Michael and about the stock market, and back then the stock market was it just reached a high of 1,300. And now it's between 11 and 13,000, depending on how the economy is doing at the moment. But, so eventually, I was able to learn Dragon for Windows 3.1. And I started going to DMD.Eliot, and assistive technology-wise, that worked pretty well. We did have a problem, though, at the time. There were very few audiobooks, so how was I to read the textbooks? And even scanning back then wasn't the greatest thing. Although, we did a lot of scanning, and we scanned it into my computer. And, of course, there were a lot of mistakes in the scanning, but it was readable. And there were some audiobooks at the time, but trying to get one for the specific course that everybody else, the specific books everybody else was using, was really hard. But I made it through, and then I did a few-month internship at the Robin Hospital down the street here. And I worked on it in Visual Basic programming language, creating a program that, and this is really crude back then, the internet wasn't very much back then. I didn't learn much at DMD.Eliot about web, because it really wasn't much to the web back then. It was basically AOL and two other ones, CompuServe, prodigy, basically, but there wasn't really much of an internet. So anyway, they had an intranet among their all different branches. We created a Visual Basic program that they needed a beeper to be beeped when their intranet was down. So I worked on that program. Unfortunately, they were reducing force as well. My timing always didn't seem to be too well between the government and Ramen House. But OVR helps me get a job with a company in Ballackenwood called Mastery Rehab. And that was accompanied by a cognitive psychologist who was using laptops to put programs on there to remind people who had cognitive disabilities, to remind them. It was basically a calendar, email, all kinds of bells and whistles to remind them to do certain things that had a crude form of banking, doing their checking account. And she started a website that I worked on, and then also did basic Microsoft Office type computing using Drag and Dictate, and also answered the phone. OVR gave me an environmental control unit, which allowed me to use my straw at the time to answer the phone or to dial out. And her business got bought out by a company in Buffalo eventually, and they moved it to Buffalo. So I was out of work. So I got a job at English Foundation. They had these drink aid bottles. You'll see what on my wheelchair had. They needed a website for that to be able to sell them around the world. And so I started working on that. And then right around, what was it, 1999, 2000, Janet and Michael Fiore's webmaster was leaving to go for more education, I think in Europe, was it? And they needed a webmaster, so they called. We had kept in touch over the years, but they called me and asked me if I would work on their websites. So I was able to get a job with them, and I've been with them now since that time. The Dragon, Naturally Speaking, has evolved from what they call Drag and Dictate. Drag and Dictate, you had to pause in between words. And Dragon got bought out by different companies. There wasn't enough business, I think, for Drag and Dictate, so they switched it to a program called Dragon, Naturally Speaking, where you would just talk naturally. And they wanted a bigger market, so they were marketing to persons that, let's say, had carpal tunnel syndrome, that could type part of the day, but not all day. They also added a medical and legal dictionaries to it, so that doctors and lawyers, instead of dictating into a dictaphone or a secretary, could just type their own. So gradually over the years it's gotten better and better, and of course computers have gotten immensely faster with more memory. And it's pretty much, I could do everything that you can. Occasionally if it freezes, computer freezes like everybody's computer freezes, I'll need somebody to hit a button to reboot, because by then that knocks out my voice program. But that's very rarely. And like I said, I'm now working for Sierra, and now that they've worked with the Academy, I've been helping Emily. My major form of advice for people is that you have to be patient. Don't dwell on what you can't do. Just find out things that you can do. I still have the same interests, but I just do things differently, that's all. And actually with Dragon, I can type faster than I did before my disability. I was kind of a two-finger kind of guy back then. So it works really well. And don't give up. Just pursue. I know even before my injury, when I was job hunting, it's very frustrating. And your self-worth goes down. And it's hard to keep your spirits up. But just keep at it, be patient. And networking is a big thing. You never know who's from your past will call you and say, hey, are you still interested, Paul? So you never know. I'd like to take any questions anybody has.